Hello everyone, welcome to the new video on my channel. Today we are going to be discussing the game of my student rated 1400 on Rapid on chess.com. The opening is crazy, the endgame is instructive, so let's jump straight into the game. So as I've said in the intro, the opening is wild and unusual, to say the least, because white opted for the queen f3 move, which is not weird in itself, because okay, we are at 1400 level, but it may be seen here. Alright, knight c3 though does not work so great with this one, because usually we go out with the queen in order to attack the f7 pawn, and obviously the knight is not helping with that, so what's that about? I don't know. And then knight a4. So this whole sequence is just bizarre to me. I'm not sure what white is expecting to achieve. The only way of getting something is that the knight is in here is obviously misplaced. However, it attacks the c5 pawn, and as we will discover, the c5 pawn will become a weakness in no time, because after d5, which is a logical continuation from black, as of now the queen e3 check is possible with the double attack to the king and to the pawn, and that's when the problems might start to occur. Anyway, I'm not sure if that's what white tried to accomplish, because at first he played bishop b5 move, and yeah, I'm not sure if that queen e3 move was planned from the very beginning, or just opponent playing white came up with this idea while playing the game, because as of now my students were not aware of this c5 weakness. He just continued development, and after queen e3 check we have quite a dilemma how to fight against it. Basically we have the three moves to fight against it, and it's not really so clear how can we maintain this pawn, surprisingly. So as I've said, I'm not sure if this is what white planned. I guess not, because of the bishop b5 move. So it's either an opening played on the rating about like 500 ELO, or like Magnus Carlsen level ELO, because if you can plan as deeply as white did in the game, so not only he played queen f3, knight c3, knight a4, but also he knew that black would develop with e6, d5, opening the e file and allowing this. I mean, it's Magnus Carlsen level, right? Anyway, coming back to the game, obviously we have a hard choice to make from the black's perspective, because the bishop covers either one will just end in the c5 pawn being lost. So perhaps queen e7 was the best practical choice, because as of now the knight cannot take the pawn, because then we would just take the queen and then the knight on c5. So that was the way to save the pawn. But my student opted for bishop e6, which is, I would say, the most natural way to continue out of those three moves, but also the worst one. Why? We'll see at the example of the d4 variation that might have been played in here, because the idea of this move is to disrupt the connection between the queen and the knight. The bishop is protecting the king, so perhaps the knight will be taken, but in here d4 is not working because of the knight takes e6 trick, attacking our queen. So in this variation, even if we grab the pawn on f2 and not allow the king to castle, at this point we have one pawn, we are one pawn down, and without the queens on the board the king does not have to feel insecure there. So that's not the way to continue. So bishop e7 in here was a better version, because as of now, okay, the bishop is attacking the knight but cannot take it because of the pin. But later on, after queen e2 maintaining the pin and castle, this is the problem. The colors are already there. So we attack the c5 knight, we will threaten with rook e8 followed by discovered attacks to the king and the queen. White is undeveloped, so we get quite an initiative for this lost pawn. but it's not easy to play, right? So bishop e6 looked more natural, but also is the worse variation. Anyway, after knight c5, my student went for taking the knight, and what happened is that on the move number 4, the position looked like that, so quite a bizarre situation. And in the move number 9, suddenly white is just better. Up a pawn, putting pressure to the c6 knight, not allowing to castle, etc. So something went very wrong. And as I've said, it's either a 500 game or Magnus Carlsen level game. My opponent did not stop blundering, he played a6, allowing the opponent to grab another pawn, and after a few more moves we ended up in this situation when black is obviously much worse without two pawns. However, we might try to get some initiative with, let's say, queen f6 move, connecting the rooks, which would then allow us to perhaps play rook from f8 to c8 to the open c file. Perhaps in the future we would like to place the other rook to the b8 on the open b file, etc. So we can get some counterplay for those pawns, but that's not what my student did. Knight b6, I'm not sure what's that about. Perhaps the knight is trying to cut away the a4 square, and in that way perhaps we will try to trap the queen somewhere, but I'm not sure if it will ever work. And for sure it will not work in the variation that occurred in the game, because even though the queen is attacked, white does not have to do anything about it, because he can just grab the bishop, and after grabbing the queen, our queen will be taken. Surprisingly, this was the better version than what happened in the game, because in this situation white is underdeveloped, we have the pressure to the c pawn, and because of that white is forced to play c3, and after d4 we have a very strong d3 idea, which would then close the bishop even more and create this weakness on d2 forever. So after cd4, rook d4, we may claim the initiative on the open c file, c2 square, d pawn weakness, etc. So we are not lost there, we can still fight. But my student at this point, after knight takes e6, realized that it was allowed, white is not losing a queen, so he just accepted that and lost yet another pawn. So we are 3 pawn down, and is it playable from this point onwards? I'm not sure. So this part of the game I will just more or less skip, because there is nothing that interesting to think about and talk about. I will just stop in the good moment, and I believe this good moment occurs around here. So black is hopeless. We cannot penetrate the white's position in any possible way. We don't have any open files. Our knight, even though it's placed on the good square, it cannot go anywhere from the square. So yeah, we are basically hopeless. We are playing some moves, I'm not sure why and what for. Anyway, even after blundering the exchange from white's perspective, we are still in not a good shape as black, because as I've said, we cannot penetrate the white's position by any means in any way. So we can just shuffle around with our pieces and not do much. a3 was quite a nice try, actually, trying to disrupt this pawn chain of white. However, if white replied correctly, which is b3 or maybe even b4 in some cases, and then rook c1, white is just staying in place, waiting for a better time to break through, or waiting for white to frustrate and play something stupid. But c4 was played, and I really don't like this option, because what black was lacking is the initiative, the activity, the idea what to do, and it was the case for the last 20 moves. And after c4, white is allowing some exchanges and also opening up the files for the black rooks. So it was for sure not a good idea from the practical standpoint. Still, after c3, white can try to show some patience, and because all the files are still blocked, the c file is just blocked with the black pawn now. With patience, we can just play queen f3, trying to go up to the pawn and grab it, and then we would have 3 pawns in exchange for exchange, and it should allow us to win the game anyway because the pawns would be so crucial there. But white rushed things too early, too quickly, as in the previous video, previous episode, right? So the common theme at this level. What I mean is that white played d5 and took the c3 pawn, perhaps because white was scared about this pawn, but that was not the continuation that we hoped for to see, because at this point the d pawn will be lost. Moreover, also the a pawn is lost. It was more or less forced line. So even though white maintains the pawn recompensation for the exchange, 2 pawns actually, there is no clear way how white can win. Basically, only black can win this game now. So even though the computer evaluation did not change much, from this point to this point, let's say, and then from d5 point to the b4 point, from the human perspective, it's very, very different, right? So let's just think about this position for a little bit. With the rook being here, attacking the h2 pawn, attacking the bishop, the b pawn cannot go anywhere, the king cannot go anywhere. So what can white play? I mean, there are not so many moves to consider, really. That's the problem for them. And also at this point, they just blundered the pawn, right? My student, I'm not sure why he didn't take it. He just continued. And this is one good situation that I wanted to briefly mention, because at this level, I believe that you should show more understanding of the not only middle game, but also a little bit of endgame. So usually in this instance, what is white lacking? White is lacking the control over the light squares, and move like h4 shows it very well. So the idea for us to win, actually, trying to win, would be to try to take over those light squares and put the biggest possible pressure to the white pieces. How? h5 was the very good move. Just delivering a check. If the king goes forward, we can just play rook to g2, trying to grab the pawn, and that's the problem for white, because we will grab the pawn, then go back to protect the b pawn from advancing, etc. So we are closer and closer to getting not only the material advantage, but also the bigger initiative. And if the king goes back after the h5 move, we can just try to then place our king to the g4 square and attack this whole pawn chain. So what I'm trying to say is that even though I skipped the most part of the middle game, you can still learn a lot from the end game, because that's where I believe many points are laying, to just pick them up and get them and pump up your rating at this level. So yeah, h5 was a very nice move to consider here. However, my student went for the king e6, not really knowing what's going on, and then after a few more exchanges it was clear that yet again only white can try to push for a win here. However, it was nicely defended by my student, covering the b pawn, covering the f pawn, and later on showing some class and some experience with going into the pawn endgame and not blundering the pawn promotion for the opponent. So that's nice, and that's also why I chose this game to show you, because I just wanted to point out that the differences between the 1200 rated players and 1400 and also 1600, I would say, we will see this in the next video, the differences are not that great. Those are the nuances, the better understanding of the middle game a little bit, maybe adding some endgame to it, right? Not blundering pawn endgames like this. Maybe understanding that h5 move in here would be useful, right? Maybe understanding that in here we still need more and more patience. But other than that, as you saw, white opted for a very strange opening line, right? Then black blundered the pawn, not only one, but then the second, the third. So In terms of openings, blundering and stuff like that, you cannot really say that, okay, this game was played by 1400 guys and this game was played by 400 rated guys, right? There are not so big differences sometimes from game to game, but in general the understanding is a little bit better, but still with little effort put to it, you may try to progress at this stage constantly, rapidly, steadily, etc. Because the differences are not that great. Anyway, usually I say that in the outro, so let's jump straight into it. Alright, so that was the game. I hope that you liked it. I had a lot of fun analyzing it, seeing it, perhaps a little bit more than my student who was not happy with the game in general, but it is what it is. A draw is a draw, and looking at the position around the move number 20, it's still a good result, let's say. But as you can see, there is plenty of room for improvement. So we'll see if the players with 200 more ELO rating will be much better or only slightly. So stay tuned for the next video. Leave a comment, a like, and also maybe you can tell me in the comments what was the idea behind the knight c3, knight a4 moves in the opening, and is it 500 rating as I've said or Magnus level. So yeah, feel free to comment on it, and see you in the next video.